Welcome to Key Knife's instructional video for adjusting knife extension and runout in your key knife modular chipping heads. Knife extension is the position of the short knife tip in relation to the faceplate. The short knife provides the finishing cut on the cant, and the extension dictates how big a cut it makes. Knife runout is the variation in height of all the short knives in the chipping head. Consistent knife runout is critical for achieving the best board finish. Runout should be checked as part of your routine maintenance program and anytime you replace your counter knives. While watching the video, you may want to follow along with the instructions found in Appendix G of your system manual. Gray banners at the bottom of the screen will indicate the sequence being reviewed. The use of a hard hat, protective glasses, hearing protection, and cut-proof gloves are recommended when performing maintenance on your chipping heads. Follow your mill's documented lockout-tagout procedure for the chipping heads before proceeding with maintenance. Safety tip: when working with chipping heads, always rotate the head backwards to the next knife to lessen the risk of cuts and pinch points. In order to measure and adjust knife extension and runout, you will need the following tools: 3/4 inch wrench, 9/16 wrench, and a 1/2 inch socket with a ratchet. Dial indicator with a magnetic base, torque wrench, extension bar, also called a height bar, air nozzle, and a wire brush. The first step is to determine the high point on the faceplate. This is done with a dial indicator. The knife closest to this high point will become the zero knife for making knife adjustments. Start by attaching the dial indicator to the machine in a spot where it's not likely to be bumped. Set the tip of the dial perpendicular to the faceplate as close to the outside of the faceplate as you can, ideally in a spot that allows the dial to stay in contact with the faceplate for a full rotation. Zero the dial indicator adjacent to the short knife and mark your starting point on the faceplate. Rotate the hub backwards and note the dial reading adjacent to each knife. You can write the reading directly on the faceplate. When you come back around to the starting point, ensure the dial again reads 0. The variation between the high and the low readings is your faceplate runout. The knife closest to the high point on the faceplate will become your zero knife for setting faceplate extension. Before we go any further, it's best to become acquainted with the push-pull system on the chipping heads. The push-pull system is comprised of push bolt. This is used to push the knife into position. The push bolt threads into the back of the base and requires a 3/4 inch socket or wrench. Pull bolt. This 5/16 inch bolt passes through the push bolt and attaches to the short counter knife. The pull bolt is used to pull the knife tip back. The pull bolt requires a 1/2 inch socket or wrench. Jam nut. This is threaded onto the push bolt and locks the push bolt into place when adjustments are complete. The jam nut requires a 3/4 inch wrench. Now let's review how these components all work. To pull the knife back, you would loosen the 5/16 inch pull bolt. Loosen the push bolt. You do not need to loosen the jam nut. Tighten the pull bolt to pull the knife back. To push the knife into the desired position, ensure that the jam nut is loose. Loosen the 5/16 inch pull bolt. Tighten the push bolt to push the knife into position. Always push the knife into final position to ensure positive contact and consistent results. Finally, when the knife is in the correct position, tighten the jam nut. Tighten the 5/16 inch pull bolt. And finally, check the dial to confirm that the knife is still set correctly. Now that you are familiar with the use of the push-pull system, let's go back to the setup of your chipping heads. Once you have identified the high point on your faceplate, you will adjust the adjacent knife to the desired height or extension. Most mills set the extension between 15 thousandths and 25 thousandths above the faceplate. Install new knives in the chipping heads before proceeding for the most accurate result. The clamp bolts on the short knives should be torqued to 120 foot-pounds with a torque wrench. Okay, let's get started. First, use your extension bar to measure the starting height of the knife closest to the high point of the faceplate. Place the extension bar across the faceplate with the required extension notch over the knife. Brush the extension bar over the knife to determine if the knife is too high or too low. When the extension is properly set, the extension bar will just barely brush the tip of the knife so that its movement isn't impeded, but the knife can still be felt. Adjust the knife height using the push-pull, and keep checking the height with the extension bar until the desired extension is achieved. Then tighten the jam nut and the pull bolt. Remember to always push the knife into final position. Mark this knife as your zero knife. Once you have set the extension on the first knife, you will need to measure the position of the other knives in relation to the zero knife. Once this is determined, these knives can be adjusted to cut on the same plane. Again, remember to use new knives and torque the clamp bolts with the torque wrench to ensure the most accurate results. So, let's get started. Place the tip of the dial perpendicular to the tip of the zero knife. When you zero the dial, only load the dial with about 20 thousandths of throw for easier operation. Slowly rotate the head back and forth across the tip of the dial until you have an accurate zero. Once the dial indicator is accurately zeroed, rotate the hub backwards to the next knife. If you have loaded the dial properly, the tip shouldn't hit anything until you get very close to the next knife. Measure the height of the knife from the dial indicator. The reading will either be higher or lower than the zero knife. It is easiest to simply record the knife height on the heel of the knife itself using a plus or minus to indicate the relative height. If the dial goes past the tip of the knife, be sure to lift the dial tip up before rotating the head back so you won't bump the dial. Repeat this sequence until you have come back to the first knife or zero knife. Confirm that the dial still reads 0. The variance between the high and the low measurement is your knife runout. Key Knife recommends a runout of plus or minus 3 thousandths from your zero knife. Let's look at an example. This chart shows the runout measurement taken from a chipping head. Pocket 1 is the zero knife. Pockets 2 and 5 are both more than 3 thousandths lower than the zero knife. Pocket 8 is more than 3 thousandths higher than the zero knife. Adjusting these three knives will bring the total runout within the recommended runout specification of plus or minus 3 thousandths. Now that you've established the knife height of all the knives, you will need to adjust them so that the overall runout is less than plus or minus 3 thousandths from the zero knife. Let's adjust the low knife into proper position. The first step is to loosen the jam nut. Then loosen the pole bolt. Tighten the push bolt to increase the knife extension. Check the height of the knife on the dial indicator as small adjustments are made. Once the desired knife extension is achieved, tighten the jam nut and pole bolt. Now let's adjust the high knife into proper position. Loosen the pole bolt and then the push bolt. Once the push bolt is loosened, tighten the pole bolt to pull the knife tip back past 0 on the dial indicator. Tighten the push bolt to push the knife tip back into position, as shown earlier. You may need to loosen the pole bolt first. Verify the position with the dial indicator. Tighten the jam nut and then the pole bolt. Once you have adjusted the knives, you can confirm that all the adjustments were made correctly with one last check using the dial indicator. The final step in setting up your heads is adjusting the long knife position. In order to do this, you will want to remove the long clamps from the head, but leave the long counter knives. To start, set the knife on the keyway of the counter knife and slide it down so that it is in contact with the short knife. The knife tip should sit back about 20 thousandths from the tip of the short knife and should be approximately parallel to the back of the base. If adjustments are needed, you can loosen the counter knife cap screw and the 2 adjusting screws. Adjust the counter knife until the knife tip is in the appropriate location. When the long knife is in the proper position, simply tighten the cap screws, holding the counter knife in place. Then snug the adjusting screws to ensure positive contact with the counter knife and lock them down with the jam nuts. Checking knife extension and runout on your key knife modular chipping heads is an important piece of your preventative maintenance program. The proper setup ensures your key knife chipping heads run efficiently and produce high-quality lumber. This concludes Key Knife's instructional video for adjusting knife extension and runout in your modular chipping heads. Following these simple instructions will yield consistent and repeatable results. For more information on recommended preventative maintenance, see Chapter 5 and Appendix E of your system manual. Instructions for completing the tasks highlighted in this video can be found in Appendix G. Please contact your Key Knife account manager for additional tips, or if you have any questions regarding the setup and operation of your Key Knife chipper system.